operating within their financial ability to fund the projects that they want to put forth. We went through a period back in 2006-07 where the town had to bail out the water commissioners because they didn't have enough revenue to support all the debt that they had taken on. And we would rather not go back into that situation. So that's why we review the commission's proposed budgets and projects.
Okay, can I make any comments about what you just said?
Yes, you can.
All right. I did some investigation when I came up on the board about that period of time. And I noted that there was just that slight little problem with the schools where they threw in $172,000 worth of bills into their drawers and never paid them. And then there was the problem with the hydrant fees that the town was paying
Lee,
and they weren't paying up. But
Lee, could I interrupt you?
Sure.
You don't need to go back through all of that. Yes,
Okay, well, wait a second.
all contributing factors. There were a lot of factors that contributed to it.
That's right. But now can I tell you where we have been so that we got ourselves on a strong financial footing? That we had that rate study where one of our biggest implements was putting in the unmetered unit charge so that we were getting monies from the people who were in multi-units with 1 meter, so that we were bringing in money to cover that. We also came to an agreement with the town about the hydrant fees so that we were getting them paid yearly. We didn't have a problem with that. We also reached out and started getting revenue from renting space on our water tanks to AT&T and Verizon to bring in more income. And we looked at the well field, had that insulated so that that was just not a seasonal entity that was bringing in very little because the seasons weren't giving us a lot of water. And so we were getting 15% of our daily water for 60% of the cost. So that helped us along to bring stability to our operation.
I understand all of that.
Okay.
I want to make sure we don't go back there again.
Well, we're trying hard.
Very
not to.
simply. Okay, can we move on?
Sure.
Don, can you put up the water budget?
So you want the water budget?
Well, I want the water budget and also the projection, the documents. You sent them all out, but I thought it might be easier to have it on the screen.
That's my co-host. Yeah. All right.
Sam, we have a projection going through 27. Is that what you're looking, is that what you're expecting to see?
Yeah, that's what I'm, yeah.
No,
Okay.
well, I sent another document to Sam, and I think it was on Friday, basically taking information from the rate study and just summarizing it so you can see what the projected revenues and expenses based on the factors in the rate study show. And this really actually goes out to 2029. So it's a couple of years longer than the 5-year rates that we're setting. But let me put this up. And again, so let me just remind you, so the rate study takes into account a number of various factors, and then we use that to base the budget on. So again, when you go to look at the budget that we're proposing, which is balanced, and what is here in the rate study, you know, the figures in the rate study are going to show in some years a small surplus, a small deficit, but we look at this annually to take into account current factors, usage, new customers, any other key drivers, maybe expenses as we incur them are higher than the 2.5% we're estimating. So I just want to preface it with that. And so let me share my screen here. unfortunately, I got two screens up, so I don't know if you guys are seeing exactly what I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it.
So you're just seeing the water fund breakdown. You're not seeing all the all the tabs open I got in the background.
No.
Okay. So we pulled the data summary level from the rate study showing a current year budget and then future. So the rate study factors from FY22 and on. So based on that, you see estimated surplus based on the rate study of 65 in 22. In 23, there's a calculated deficit of 17,000. In 24, there's a deficit of 56. I'm not really sure, Sam, what you want me to go through. Again, I expected everybody to have already reviewed this, and I was going to answer questions. I'm not really sure what specifics I can answer or what you want me to really walk through.
Well, I think what we're
guess-
looking at primarily is fiscal year 22. And based on if we get the rate study increase, that will produce at the estimated water sales, I'm going to call them, and that's estimated because we really don't know what they're going to be, but it will produce a $65,000 surplus.
In fiscal 22, based on the study, right? We've balanced the budget, so there's no expected deficit or surplus. And again, I mean, did you say something, Sam?
Yeah, the 340 is the new debt service,
That's a projected debt service. Yep.
right? That would be committed to with the water department's request for some capital improvements.
Right. And again, the big factor that is really driving this is the GAC, the GAC filtration system.
Right?
That price tag is about $3.6 million. Broken out again with the study was conservative at 4% interest over 20 years. So offhand, I believe that's $270,000 that's factored into that new debt service number. If approved, Jason would be working with MWRA to go through and submit a package to hopefully get some SRF funding, which would either be maybe a 0%, a 2%. Again, I don't know what they're currently offering, but I know it's better than the market rates. So again, I mean, just on that, if we're able to get assistance from the SRF loans, 2% versus a full we're projecting, it is a significant savings. And then also in fiscal 23, so the way the study, and again, we took this information from the engineer, so the study was kind of already set up, a lot of the schedules. So they estimated initially when a project was funded, the debt service would be factored in that year. So that's why, even though we might not finish the project until end of 22 and the actual borrowing, if approved, might not start being paid until fiscal 23. It's in there in the year that is approved, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So with that assumption, if it went online in fiscal 23, we would see an increase in operating costs of about $300,000, just related to the ongoing operations and maintenance of that GAC system. And so, in my opinion, based on all the factors that we've looked at, the debt service layered in, I think, based on these out years, I think we're more than covering our costs. And again, we're going to have to monitor this year over year. A lot of the projects in the CIP are based on our paving plan to maximize efficiency, really, and then reduce the cost instead of having to pay for the repaving. It's built into the paving plan. So we're trying to target projects based on the paving plan, so that the water isn't having to pay for that.
Right.
So things can change each year depending if something happens with the paving plan. But I think the Water Commission has done a great job of continuing to be conservative in their budgeting approach. We've had some good years with retained earnings that helps our flexibility and able to pay in some of the years. Maybe we do pay with retained earnings instead of borrowing, and that will help the future years. I think overall, I think it's a conservative forecast. I think it's been, really looked into. I know Jason spent a lot of time, the Water Commission has spent a lot of time going through this. I spent a lot of time with Jason and the commission trying to understand it. And, I really do think that it's a solid forecast and something that the water department can support over the future years.
Does anybody? No, go ahead, Don. I don't want to cut you off.
No, that was it. That was the perfect timing, Sam.
Okay. Does anybody on capital budget have any questions over this?
Well, let me start by saying I have looked at everything, Don, that's been presented. And one of the things that really puzzles me is to spend $3 million on this GAC system to correct a problem which we don't now have. In other words, according to the material that you have sent us, or Jason, or maybe Lee has sent us, the numbers don't add up here. That the so-called THM pollutant, the state standard, according to what you've sent to us, is 80, and we're at 63. We don't have any history of it, so I don't know whether it's increasing or decreasing or where it's going. But the implication of that is a $3 million expense, capital expense, plus a $300,000 per year expense, $300,000 per year, plus another $50,000 for Jason. So, we're talking $350,000 additional expense for this system. And really, I'm hearing an echo here for some reason. But anyway, it just seems as though at this time, why would we actually go out for that kind of spending when you've got the SCADA system at $1 million, and then you've got the actual conversion of the chlorine to a liquid chlorine system as well. You got a lot of stuff going on simultaneously, some of which seems to make a great deal of sense, some of which could be postponed. That's kind of how I look at this. And because it looks like deficits going forward, in spite of what we might think might happen, that is by no means guaranteeing that we in fact would have more revenue or anything else to cover those 4 or 5 years where you show deficits going forward. So it does not look like a great picture, except for the year fiscal 22. That's about it.
Anybody else have questions?
Sam, I have questions just on the structure of the budget.
Yeah.
So help me understand some of these line items. Where I see existing debt, and that's row 24, and I see in general it's 2.2 million. Is that money that we are expending each year on debt?
Currently,
That's
right
the
now,
debt. That's the
Yes.
debt service each year.
Okay, and so we're adding to that debt service in 22. We're adding, is it 10% or more than 10% to that existing debt?
Yeah, more
Because-
than 10%. I haven't looked at the percentage.
Right,
340,000.
right. And so Lee Jenkins, what you're saying is that the GAC system is driving that new debt service. Do I have that correct?
correct.
Okay. And it starts in fiscal 22. That's when we're going to start paying for that new system.
Well, no. So potentially, again, as I mentioned, the system, the way the study was set, and I agree, there is a little bit of an echo here.
Yeah, if everybody that's not speaking could just hit mute on their phone, the mic won't pick up what's coming out of your speaker.
Thank you, Brian. So if that was approved for fiscal 22, a $3.6 million project, I doubt will be finished within this year. Again, it depends on the rates we get, the timing of the project, and when the project will be complete. with MWRA, they may bond right up front if we got that money. We need to show an authorization to even go to MWRA to try to get SRF funding. So no, to answer your question shortly, no, it may not come online to actually pay until fiscal 23. But we're proposed, the schedule in the study was based and factored into the new debt service the year it was approved, not necessarily the exact start of payment date. As years go, and we have those debt service schedules set, we'll know the existing debt or that new debt figure going forward. So should he answer the question? I'd be happy to.
Yeah,
follow up on that.
I have another question on the structure of the spreadsheet. The line above existing debt, row 23, rate or retained earnings funded capital is shown as a debit of 276. What is that?
Well, again, we tried basically getting you some information to take a look at this in long term, and this may be shooting us in the foot because now we have to explain more. But this is, so the way, so if we did not do this rate study and we did not go for an increase, right now in our budget, before going to fiscal 22 budget, we had 300,000 built within our current rate structure to do projects in cash. So basically next year, the 276 is essentially a few projects that will fit within the rate.
Okay, all right, so that changes. I guess what I'm reacting to is the amount of how much of the budget is going to debt and debt service. You know, $2.5 million out of a $5.3 million overall budget. And I understand that the GAC is required and we've got to deal with that. But I worry about other expenses that are not mentioned here, or maybe they're unforeseen, that could come up and kill us or certainly hurt. And looking at row 25, new debt service, and how that increases dramatically between 22, 23, and out into the future, I really worry about how much more debt the water department can take on and have no negative impact on the town's budgets.
I get what you're saying. I mean, to me, I'd look more at the subtotal of that section, right? So we're at 2.7 million in FY21, 2.8 in 22, 2.7 in 23, 2.9, 2.93. So it's leveled out essentially. I mean, I know those numbers of new debt look big, but in the overall scheme, I mean, that's why it's kind of broken out this way, right? You have your total revenue, your total operating, and then really it's capital driven expenses, whether that is something that's fit in the rate, we're using retained earnings maybe for, and then you have your existing debt and new debt. To me, that whole section encapsulates all capital related work. And so,
Okay.
go ahead.
So I now understand more, and looking now row 23, the retained earnings funded capital, and I see zeros in 3 years and 5 figures instead of 6 figures in 2 of those years. Is there any reason to think that in 23 that zero would actually go to a 6-figure number or a 5-figure number because of some unforeseen need? Could that happen?
I would say no. So again, this is heavily based on capital improvements. Capital improvements can change year over year. Like I said, I mean, all the main replacements within that schedule are based on the paving plan right now. If something happened to X street that we planned on paving and putting the water main in. And that got pushed off to another year. Maybe that was a $500,000 project, $1 million project. But really now instead this year, we're only gonna do a $400,000 project because that's how it's gonna shake out with the paving plan, or maybe there's a need that peaks up higher than where something is on the schedule. You know, things can move within the plan. So I don't foresee something popping up like that would all of a sudden, we'd have a 6-digit number in new debt service and another 6-digit number. But at the same time, it can, and with the retained earnings figures that we're having right now and how we've done budgetarily, we could do a $600,000 project, a $500,000 project if something came up. That's a great flexibility that the water department has created within its budgeting and its financials.
Right. All within their enterprise, correct?
All within their enterprise, correct.
Right. Great. Thank you. And thanks everyone for your patience as I tried to comprehend what's in front of me. Thanks.
No problem. Anybody else have a question? Susan?
Sorry.
No, I think it's very straightforward. Thank you.
Okay. Dick, Brian, you all set?
I had a question. So line 30, the estimated surplus deficit line, okay? Is that effectively the forecast of, you know, free cash in those given years?
It could
In other
be.
words, is that the forecast of what the change in the retained earnings would be in each of those years?
No, I would expect it to be better than that. So if you look at year over year, we've had increases in our retained earnings. Again, with being budgetarily conservative, we've had turnbacks in surpluses and revenues, which is great. It's good. We've continued that conservative approach. So I would foresee our retained earnings being, unless something out of the ordinary happened, Brian, multiple significant water main breaks, something like that, that really made us push our expenditure budgets out of extraordinary maintenance and things like that. You look over the last few years, we've had a couple $100,000 of turnbacks. Again, looking at budget to actual, that have, you know, attributed to our retained earnings. And so again, to answer your question, no, that's, to me, is not a projection of what would actually happen.
Okay, so the turnbacks are basically because the actual numbers are tracking lower than the forecasts in line 21 year
Right.
after year. Is that the
Yes.
net summary?
Correct.
Okay, and occasionally one of the capital items might get pushed out, and that could contribute as well. But mostly, it's running under budget in terms of the OpEx numbers.
Exactly. Yeah, and this
Okay.
is, we built in the 2.5. We know that the water department's been experiencing some increases in chemical costs.
Right.
Not everything is increasing across the board at 2.5%. Again, it's projections, and that's why I was hesitant to show these surpluses and deficits, but I wasn't massaging this to make it zero. I wanted to show what the forecast is showing, or what the rate study with its assumptions in it are showing, knowing that we go back every year to look at the key drivers, like I said, usage and actual costs, the capital improvement plan every year to kind of see where we're at.
Okay, but to make a long story short, you would expect these debt service numbers and these capital numbers largely to track as forecast here. You would expect, line 21 or actual expenses to track below what's forecast in line 21, just based on historical precedent and sort of management strategies and successes. And therefore you would expect line 30 to be more positive than these surpluses and deficits that are included in this rate study. Is that the net summary?
Yes, and let me just add one more thing to that. So again, to be conservative, we put in the 4% for interest. We know now it's much lower, but again, we don't know what will happen in the next year, next
Right.
5. So, 4%, hey, if we got 3%, you know how greatly that would benefit us, let alone I believe the escalation factor that was used for the project cost. So again, when the CIP was put together, the 10 years of data and costs were put in as of, I think, 2019 or 2020 costs, whenever that was put together. But then based on when we were expecting to do the project, an escalation factor was also factored into that. So if it was $100,000 and it wasn't happening for 5 years, it factored in an escalation of 5% per year to account for increases in construction costs, material costs, anything else. Then it factored in, we're gonna borrow at this year for 20 years at 4%. So to add on to that, I do think it's conservative and that the years that show a deficit will definitely be covered. I don't wanna say definitely, but in my opinion, I think with our management and oversight of this, we'll be fine.
Okay, and if we do generate additional free cash, and we continue to grow retained earnings, despite what line 30 suggests otherwise here, I assume we would have the ability to elect to fund some of these projects in cash and not necessarily incur new debt service.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'll actually be talking at the next water meeting to maybe repurpose one of the prior projects that we authorized for borrowing and use retained earnings instead. That's definitely, again, this is where it comes into the management of this is going to be important. But I think we have the right people in the right places that will be able to manage this appropriately to be able to do things like that, Brian.
Okay, so if we layer in all of this conservatism in these various line items, we basically run flat retained earnings over the 9-year period, roughly. But if we outperform this, which we fully expect to do on a range of variables here, we would actually either continue to build retained earnings or reduce our new debt service, or both.
Correct.
Okay.
And you know, again, in monitoring those figures,
Yep.
I'd have to understand again the mechanism, because I know town meeting is required for approval of increases. I mean, if it got to a point that it was too high, and not to get too far into it, but I mean, there could be a year that you could smooth things out, maybe reduce the total budget or reduce the rates for a year to eat into some of the retained earnings. Again, just options, but to me, I think moving things into using retained earnings instead of borrowing would be the first way I would go. But
yeah,
I would just have a feeling that question could come up if retained earnings got a little too high.
Don, what's your current level of retained earnings?
Right now, we're at 1.3 million, about 26% of our budget.
So you've got quite a bit of, I'll call it slush fund there if you need it.
That is correct.
Anybody on Capitol have any further questions?
The only other one, Don, this is line 13. It says total rate revenue. It says 2.5%. We're going to go from fiscal 21 to fiscal 22. Yet the jump is almost $300,000 from $4,249,379 to $4,558,879.
Mm-hmm.
That's a substantial jump in revenue. That's 300,000 or something in revenue. Is that realistic?
Realistic in actually obtaining that?
Yep.
Those receipts? I believe so. And again, so this also is factoring in usage from FY20 and before. I believe it's either a 5 or a 10-year period. So it's not taking into account increased usage levels, which we've seen in FY21. So again, a continued conservative approach in that sense. So I believe based on what we're showing is attainable.
And that increased usage comes from what?
Say that again, Sam?
What does the increased usage come from? New construction, existing users?
Oh, it could be, well, this year it's been a lot of people at home. A lot of increased use over the last 12, 13 months. I can't really explain it exactly, but that's what it seems to be attributable to.
Lee, do you have a concept of what that increase is coming from?
You're talking about the increased usage, it's going to give us the $300,000?
Yes?
Okay, well, you have to understand now, part of this is the 2.5%. And then the other part is the tier 3 that Don and Jason have been working on. And this tier 3 is the segment now that we have revised because it was decided that commercial users and apartments should not be paying that. I had proposed moving the town buildings into tier 2 again, because they have not been in tier 2 for over, I don't know, well over a decade, to give us a little more income, but something happened with that plan. And I'm not sure whether or not we're going to be able to maintain that. I had questions about how that number was contrived, but they've assured me that they know what they're doing, so.
Can you clarify what you're talking about, Lee?
What I'm
Please.
talking about, because a lot of the information that came out of you and Jason, you know, I looked at it and I said, a lot of this was leaks. That was not a substantial means to base anything on.
Well, I'm pretty sure if you remember, we made a small adjustment conservatively on the actual budget to take into account your issue. I'm not going to argue about it, but
Yeah,
it's not quite true. So
Well,
but even
here's
so,
a-
I'm a little concerned that, you know, we lost income from that other asset that I had suggested.
by raising it to the town and schools,
I mean, well, I was really shocked when you came up with that number at the advisory committee that was off by over $40,000. And, you know, taking a look at what the schools have been using
all right,
over.
let's move on if we could. I'm not going to go back and forth on this.
Oh, well, no, I'm just saying that that was kind of a bomb thrown out at the last minute, which kind of threw us off.
We're here to talk about capital.
I know, but this is part of capital because it is income. But if
Okay.
you don't want to talk about it, that's fine.
Well, I have a quickie question to make sure that I understand this. I just took 2.5% of the 4,249,000 in revenue in 21, and took 2.5% of that and came up with roughly 106,000. That, if I understand it correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, that represents the amount of revenue increase due to the rate increase. Is that right?
Yes and
2.5%,
no.
yeah.
Yes?
No, what you're missing in there is that tier 3. The 2.5% is the rate increase on everything except tier 3, because tier 3. is
Excuse me,
new.
Lee. I just want to understand that if the rate increase is 2.5%, that due to the rate increase alone, not switches into tier 1, tier 3, tier 4, or whatever, but that 106,000 is the amount that's due to the rate increase alone.
I presume you have to ask Don that question.
Well, I did, and he said it was, so
106, yeah, 2.5%, basically
roughly
everything that is a rate,
106.
everything that essentially is tied to a rate,
Yeah,
which wouldn't be Linden
That means
Pond and a
that
few
over-
other things, would be from the rate increase. Everything else, which is about another 200, is a factor from going from a 2-tier system to a 3-tier system.
yeah, okay, all right, now I understand. That's what I was trying to understand. Thank you.
I have a question then. Is
Okay.
this budget then based on approval of the tier 3 change that's being proposed for town meeting? Is it based on a vote that hasn't happened yet? Or is it based on previous votes and it's legitimate? Or, you know,
So what's gonna be
factor?
on the warrant, Mike, will be an article for town meeting to vote and approve the rates as presented from this study, which include the 2.5% and the tier 3.
And that's what
And
the
then
budget was
upon
based on.
approval or not, then would go to the next article of the budget. So we'll have a backup non-rate increase budget for the water department in the event the rate increase fails.
Okay, but the budget we're looking at here is based on a vote that has not taken place yet. Is that correct?
Town meeting needs to vote that. That's correct.
I see.
It has not happened.
All right. I mean, I hate to say this, but shouldn't we be looking at the more conservative spreadsheet, which does not assume town meeting will approve? What, and-
Well, I mean, this whole study was done based on need. So we're proposing the budget based on that study that is being presented.
I understand the need, but there may be, people may take exception to how you're meeting the need and how you're structuring the rate increase and the fairness. You know, it was just announced that there was consideration for charging, I believe, the town and commercial users the same tier 3, and then that was taken off the table. That's all politics. That's all a decision to be made by the town's citizens. So in my view, this spreadsheet here is actually not conservative. It's based on a hope that the town will support a rate increase, structured in a way that may not be fair to some people.
Well, doesn't it also mean, Mike, that we as a committee cannot make any recommendation on the capital projects until we know if the rate study and rate increase for water has been approved?
I would agree with that view, Sam.
And hopefully it's on the warrant before it gets to our recommendation.
Yeah.
Sam,
Yes,
can I clarify or at least try to get a better understanding of what was just said? But are you saying that you can't consider the capital projects as provided at this point until that rate has been voted?
yes,
So
because
that
we're
won't
looking
happen.
at-
That
We're
won't happen
looking
until town meeting though.
well, Don, we're looking at a budget that assumes that the rate increase is passed and everything with it, so that the increased revenue is there. If that's not there, should we be approving any capital projects or not? I don't know. I haven't seen a budget that tells me what's happening if the rate increase does not get approved.
And if we were to approve this particular spreadsheet, that states that the Capital Budget Committee supports the rate increase in the way that it's structured. And we have not had that debate. We have not
Well,
looked at that. question.
And that's really
Oh, man,
not
see,
in our purview.
right, I think it's getting a little, I know they kind of go hand in hand. Again, this study is heavily impacted based on the capital improvement plan. But again, capital budget is looking at the capital needs, I believe, right?
Yes.
I mean,
But it's not up to us.
maybe Chris can jump in for a second and clarify some of these things, but I mean, I don't know how you get to that point of approving a budget unless, you have to do it. You have to approve a rate or not, and then it can get to the budget process, which does include capital, but it's a separate article. So just call it Article 1, 2, and 3. Article 1 is to go for the rate study, or the new rate system.
right?
Article 2 would be for essentially the operating budget. Article 3 is capital related. So you can, yeah,
We'd have
I feel like I'm talking to
recommendation from the floor once we find out what's happening.
right.
If
But-
everybody agrees that with the rate increase budget will cover the capital expense. And I realize you have 1.3 million in retained earnings, but if you don't get the rate increase, all of a sudden, all future capital projects start to erode the retained earnings, and eventually you end up in a deficit position,
Well, I mean,
or could.
yeah, again, looking at FY21, we have 300,000 with no rate increase to do capital. I mean, yeah, it squeezes out, again, the GAC filtration system is the biggest driver in this thing.
Right?
Um,
And that's something probably needed.
No one is, I don't think anyone is questioning the need for the GAC. Where I do have problems is how we pay for it. And you have, not you, Don, Lee Jenkins has proposed a rate increase structured in a certain way. And that revenue is a prerequisite for this budget. And that revenue is not based on any vote so far. And there may be other ways to pay for the $3.2 million GAC. The water department has chosen to add a tier 3 and charge just residential owners to pay for it, not spread it out across all users. And that could be, it could be its downfall at town meeting. So this is not on solid ground in my view.
Let me try and skin the cat maybe a slightly different way. Don and Lee, what would you do if the rate increase is not approved? How would you fund the fiscal 2022 capital items?
Well, we would not be doing the GAC system.
And what would that mean?
In terms of,
Well, in terms of the water operation, if you don't do that.
Lee would have to speak more on that. I don't
Okay,
really know all the impacts of the GAC myself.
now, we do have problems in this town with pollution, that people do not want to stop polluting, and there are certain boards that allow things to happen that we have to mitigate. We could possibly put off the GAC for a year or two. We also have to take into account the pilot study that we're doing in the well field, because the well field may have to be permanently closed, depending on how the pilot study comes out and what the expenses are, because the expenses may be too high in order to maintain it, even though we are still carrying debt on it until 2025. But these are issues that we're going to have to deal with down the road. Now, as to the rate study, this is not something that the water commissioners determined. The rate study was done by it started with Ty and Bond Engineering. And when they didn't finish it, Don and Jason took it over, and it was all of their recommendations that we are following. And it was, to answer a question.
Understand that.
Pardon?
The question is, if the rate study does not get approved,
Then we're going to be postponing, that's all.
we
We're
just,
going to be postponing capital projects. And then
Okay.
take a look at what we did on Elm Street. Elm Street was supposed to have been done 2 years ago, and it wasn't done because, well, this and that happened. They didn't know what they were doing in the harbor. We had 2 major breaks that we weren't planning on having, and we had to deal with it in our budget.
okay,
We will just have to deal with stuff as we always do.
okay.
Okay, so
That's about it.
Sam, is it possible to perhaps vote this, contingent on passage of the rate study?
Yeah, because the rate study vote would come before our.
Sorry, the rate increase, I misspoke. But, you could vote it contingent on the passage of the rate increase. In other words, if the rate increase doesn't get voted through, then, we're not approving these capital items.
Correct.
Because I think what Leah's saying is they wouldn't do these capital items.
So
I'm
there,
just trying to figure out a way to break this chicken and egg sort of circular reference we've got going. I mean, certainly, we don't want to approve capital projects and actually have WaterGo fund capital projects if they don't get their rate increase. And I think they're saying that they wouldn't fund capital projects if they don't get their rate increase. So we just need to figure out a way to lay this out.
Could we as a board ask the water department and Don Pyatt to give us another budget to review, which does not include which would be based on our current rate structure?
Yes, we do have that budget. Done.
But I'm asking CBC, would they rather look at a budget based on our current rate structure in terms of recommendation to town meeting?
Well, the other thing we could do, Michael, is look at that and say, okay, which items would we fund no matter what, with or without a rate increase, and approve those unconditionally, right?
Yeah.
And then let's look at the items that will only get done with the benefit of a rate increase and approve those conditionally.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out how to get this done.
yeah, I understand.
Because certainly, they can do some capital projects without the rate increase, and we should approve those unconditionally.
Great.
Thank you, Brian. That is what I was going to say, because the GAC is something that I feel that we could push down the road another year or two, depending on what's happening. And to
Right.
see, I've been doing studies to see where some of our source point pollution is coming into Lily Pond.
Let me jump in with this. I tend to, actually, Brian, to agree with you. There are 2 other capital items. One is the SCADA system, and that would be the improvement on the security of the system. I do think that's critical, I'll be honest with you. As you know, it probably is dangerous to have anybody have external access to a programmable controller in a water system, and certainly you'd want to make sure that's secure. The second is the conversion from the gaseous chlorine to liquid chlorine. And that one's reasonable, I think, to do. I think it makes sense to do it. It's safer. And so I'd say there are 2 projects clearly that you would do irrespective of what we think about the GAC system. I do think on the GAC system, someone should be more clear on what has been the trend on these trioethanes, because they really are simply a reaction of our current chlorine system with organic material. That's what they are. And so the question really is, since we are well under the limits actually set right now, how has the trend been? At least give us some information, and you should, not that we have anything to do with it, but it allows you to actually see whether or not the GAC system really is necessary at this moment or can be postponed a year or 2. if in fact you can't get the rate increase. That just makes sense to me.
Well, yes, and also in relationship to that, we have to see, as I said, what the pilot study's doing over at the well field. And if putting in a system there is going to be too expensive, if there is some other type of proposal we can come up with to get the well water somehow projected into our system here and go through the GAC. And that's something that we've been talking about. So, you know, these are items on the table that we can't give answers to right now. And, you know, and about the TOCs, you know, this is a problem. I'm sure some of you here remember when we were talking about sewering Beechwood. How long has that been? And this is where the organics are coming from. And I remember talking to the health board, and they assured me that everything was really great in Beechwood. All the systems were Title V, and all of a sudden I got the cesspool map. And the kids at CSCR, they did a study in 2019 where there were optimal brighteners that went off the chart all the way from Erin River all the way into the harbor. You know what I'm saying? Something's wrong here. So we have to kind of get together with everybody and see what we can do to get some of this stuff under control. And we have all
Okay,
the
so getting back to the capital items.
So we can, yeah, I go along with what Ralph said. Those two capital items are very important because SCADA security is a very hot topic now after what's happened in different parts of the country with SCADA systems being hacked.
Okay, so just getting back to the capital items, is there anything other than the GAC system that would get deferred in the event you do not get your rate increase? Do you have the ability to fund all the other items out of your retained earnings, your free cash, and your rate, X the GAC, or is there something else that needs to be flagged as conditional as well?
Currently, I think that's about the only one. What do you think, Don?
In the items that are before you now, that's the only one. The other ones,
Okay.
if no budget was passed, if no increase was passed, we could cover within our current rate structure, the 420 or so, or somewhere around the 415. It's already built in based on how we were adding roll off of debt to fund
Right.
capital. So those two could definitely be funded without this in the
So
event.
400 and change is kind of a normal capital year for you guys in the context of your existing rates.
Right, we've been building that as a debt, kind of like the capital budget committee. As the debt rolls off, we tried to put as much as we can to fund the next year's project out of the rate to limit the amount of retained earnings or needing to borrow. So we could definitely cover those two other projects without the rate study increase.
You see, because I'm a person who doesn't really like to gather a lot of debt, that I have been directing the board to do projects through cash rather than borrow. And that's how we've gotten a lot of our projects finished.
Right, and you're sitting on a lot of retained earnings as well. So I don't know if people have other thoughts, but you know, at this point, I mean, I'd like to suggest that we, as a committee, consider, you know, just unconditionally approving all of the items except for the GAC, and, you know, consider approving the GAC conditional on a successful vote at town meeting, you know, on the rate increase.
Well,
Are
would
there
anybody like
things
to
that other
make a
people?
motion, or do you want me to make a motion?
Well, I don't have the list of the other capital items in front of me, so I'd like someone else to make the motion, but just because you can
I'll make
actually
a
read it out.
motion. I'll make a motion that we approve the SCADA system and the chlorine conversion, I'm gonna call it. That's a total of 429,000, I think.
Total exactly, it's 428, 450 for the two.
Okay, that was pretty close.
Yeah, very clear. I just want to be clear for the record.
So I made that motion. Anybody want to second it?
I'll second.
All those in favor of it? Ralph?
Aye.
Thank you.
Right.
Susan?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Seconded, you must be in favor of it. I'm in favor of it. Aye. Michael?
I don't know what we're voting on in terms of something on an agenda that we've got. Is this, are we doing this properly? If we are doing it properly, I'd vote aye. But this just suddenly came up out of a discussion. This really wasn't placed in front of us. I understand it's a way to sort of get around a roadblock, but are we doing this properly?
Well, I think you all got a copy of the capital plan, the proposed budget with the rate increase. And we've listened to Don and Lee on the ability of water to cover these two projects if they do not get a rate increase. I'm not sure what you're
Sam, can I ask a follow-up? So I know Jason has submitted the 3 request forms weeks ago. It was my understanding that the Capital Budget Committee had already reviewed these at one point. Then, you know, Jason, the group came to explain the study. And now we're here for the third time, essentially, to give further information. So it was my understanding that this was just more follow-up to give more information, answer questions. But my understanding was that you guys already reviewed this, at least for the forms themselves and what was coming through at the town meeting.
I would say, no, we have not. We have not.
I don't have any capital requests from water. Now, if one was sent to us, I don't know where it is. I mean, it certainly is possible.
Well, Jason did send me copies of the 3 that were sent out.
Yeah, we don't have.
I was going to say that the one, I think you're right, Don. They are on the OneDrive in fair, actually quite good detail as I see it.
Okay,
So I mean, that's what I quoted from. I can see them all there and they're pretty good. Actually, they're very well done, to be perfectly honest with you. So,
well, that's my oversight, then I apologize.
yeah, right.
I would abstain on this vote. I feel like I have not reviewed it.
Okay. And then do we want to take I hate to do a contingent vote. I think what we should do is hold the recommendation on the GAC system until we see if the rate study passes.
That means we'd have to vote.
We have to vote at town meeting floor.
After the rate study is already passed.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think that's the best way to do it. I hate to do a contingent vote.
I'd also suggest, I'd also suggest, Sam, that on the GAC system, we really should be, in spite of the fact I do think that Jason has done a good job in writing that up. I really do think so. And it's really quite a bit of detail there. The real question is the need to do it now. And second, whether or not there are other options which might cost less, whether it was to get the well fields going. In other words, we don't have, not that it's our purview. It is our purview when we actually are voters, okay? But it's not our purview now, for sure. But it really feels as though that this one is a very high expense for something that is not necessarily required right now, and which in fact may be ameliorated by other means. So I'd rather not vote on it now, but I'd rather know that when we get to town meeting that there's lots more information on what the options are and whether or not, if in fact we do, even if we do pass the rate increases, whether or not this is a good thing to do at this time, or is it necessary to do it this time? So that's all.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, one answer here to you. When we started with the GAC study, it was for just the TTHM. And during the pilot study, it was discovered that it also takes out the PFAS, which is that large spectrum of chemicals. And there is another question coming down the pike about glycophosphates that the Mass Department of Agriculture is asking us to test for which is something that is in Roundup, which we may have to mitigate. Because, we have found that our residents do not quite pay attention to all of the information we send them as to what they should and should not use, especially in the watersheds that go into the system. So, this is a question whether or not this GAC would also take out the glycophosphate, which it looks like the state will be requiring us to eliminate if it is found.
Okay,
Lee, it seems like it would be good
Move on
to know
here.
that. I mean, if we were going to spend 3 million on this, and then we find out we have to take out glycophosphates and this system doesn't do it.
Well, I mean,
And
this
that-
is the question that I have before we get started on the GAC. We were going to
Yeah.
have this come up at our next meeting.
Yeah.
Because this is something that has just come up in the last 2 weeks from the state.
Okay. So just recognizing this is evolving, I mean, if the answer is we have to go drill a new massive well field somewhere, on the west side of town, let's do that as opposed to spending 3 mil on the GAC system that doesn't even get us to a solution, right?
Well, with the well fields, though, we don't know whether or not, take a look at our current well field. The
It's in
people have
town.
been-
I'm talking about a well field that's out of town.
Out of town. I don't know where it could be because all surrounding towns have difficulty with their well fields. They're not getting sufficient water. We're the only town that has sufficient water and are not in a water ban at this time.
okay,
This
we
is
move on.
sure.
Lee, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? As soon as I find out anything about this new glycophosphate, I'll be happy to let you all know. Unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic about what the state will tell us to do, but what can we do?
We'll have to wait and see.
This is where we are. We're basically in a wait and see pattern, but I do see some, other good things coming out. One thing I do want to let you know, if you are looking at our budget, where it says what we're getting from the rate revenue, we refer to the rate study, not the rate increase, because in the rate study, it shows everything that is getting increased. And if you look at our budget, the first line is the water use charges. That's the number where, you can just close your eyes and shoot a dart at the wall. The capital recovery fee is a basic number where you're within a margin of error because it's based on your actual users. Your users would be going up during the year. Then the hydrant and sprinkler charges, that's for public. If there are new developments in town that the fire department requires them to have a hydrant, that may increase, and then the town hydrant fee. That is also dependent on the fire department, whatever the fire department requires. So, but they're basic solid numbers. The only one that's a real variable is the first one, the water use charges. That depends on the weather.
Understand?
Okay,
We need
so
to
I
move
mean, if
on
you're
because
looking at
we
these,
need to move on because we have some other people we have to listen to on the town hall committee. Okay,
hey, thank you so much. Look forward
thank
to
you.
the meeting.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Don.
Bye-bye.
Justine, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but we were expecting some people from the town hall building committee.
I'm promoting them right now.
Sam, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
So what is the plan for sewer then? I may be able to answer some I guess you're now promoting everybody for town hall, but how are we gonna go forward with their capital requests? Is one item 200,000? I'd be happy to answer a couple quick questions if you have. I believe you should have
Well, we
a
can't-
request form.
not hearing from them, it's very hard to come up with a recommendation.
Well, the one item is basically the proposed funding source is gonna be their retained earnings.
Yeah,
It's a $200,000 item. We're gonna use about 151,000 of retained earnings, and then we have about another 50,000 from prior year articles that we're gonna repurpose to
Yeah,
cover.
we don't
So,
have any retained earnings left, right?
well, if we use 150, they'll have about 128,000 left. which is about 5% of their budget, which is kind of
Yeah,
along the lines of where they live, between 5 and 12%. And again, we get into the whole calculation at the end of fiscal 21 and
yeah.
the new retained earnings number. So they have the
I
funds
understand
to do
that,
the
but-
project. It's a little different than looking at the whole rate study and what you're going to approve with water, I feel like. But
Well,
I
it
just wanted-
is. It's very much different than the water.
I just want to make the point that the funding is available. It's adequate in that this is a project they wanted to do last year. There was a little mix up, I believe, on getting information and the amounts and so again, I can't really speak to last year.
We've got
COVID.
time. We have time before town meeting to get the information and to make a recommendation.
So I guess,
You should make a recommendation without having the information.
so you and I had a conversation a week ago, and so I had mentioned that there's no 5-year, 10-year plan with them right now. They're working with Woodland and Curran. They have items that are on a list, but there's no dollar value. It's not a full plan. So I don't know what information that we can help provide to make this decision. Again, where it's a one item request for this year that the funding is coming from retained earnings and some repurposed capital articles. I'd be happy if there's specific guidance that the committee can give me now to help you make that decision in a future meeting. Please do so now, because otherwise I think we're going to be kind of chasing our tails, figuring out
Yeah,
what
Don, I
you
understand.
folks need to make that decision for town meeting.
I understand what you're saying. Do you have the sewer financials and financial projections?
No, there are none. We don't have a 5 or a 10-year projection for the sewer department. We just don't.
Well, it sort of puts us between a rock and a hard place.
They've not,
Asking to make a capital purchase and not understanding how they are financially.
Agreed.
I'd be happy to take
Do it.
guidance on what you need. We're not going to be able to put together a clean 5 or 10 year for another year. We still need information from Woodard. I mean, we won't have that type of information for you for town meeting. Unfortunately, I mean, that's just,
Well, I'm not going to take it any further tonight. I'll give you a call tomorrow, if that's all right.
yeah, that will work. But I think we need input as a committee, what exactly you need, so that I don't want to waste a bunch of time gathering or again, I'm not going to be able to put together projections for 5 years. I'm not going to be able to put projections together for next year because we need to look through their capital needs in the future. And I just don't have that information.
We would ideally like to see a capital projection and some idea of what their financial situation is today. And if they have a financial projection, that would be helpful. That's ideally what we'd like to have. And you're telling me we can't get any of that. So
We can't make a decision. We can't make any recommendation without.
yeah,
So let
I
me
think we just say no recommendation at this point. If
So
that
to do essentially a
town
projection,
meeting,
it sounds
if it
like we'd have,
If it changes before town meeting, we can make a recommendation from the floor.
okay.
Well,
Don, let me ask you two questions. Do we actually have a capital request? Have we received a capital
Exactly.
request on this?
we have a proposal on the table that we can review.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there is a request on the OneDrive, is that correct?
Yep.
Yes, yeah, it's there, Brian.
All right,
Okay.
can you direct me
That's
to
okay.
it so I can see it? Because I've not seen it. And this is the second time in this meeting that I realize.
If someone could flag it
looking
and
at
just forward
something
it
on
by
a-
email for the rest of us that are
OneDrive.
bad at sort of playing Dungeons and Dragons on OneDrive, that would be helpful.
I mean, it would be very helpful for a meeting to have a link at least to whatever document you want us to review, number one. But if you can direct me or send me a link through email now, I will be happy to go take a look at it.
Okay, so the second question, Don, is you said that, this would pull 151 out of retained earnings and there would be 128 left.
Mhm.
Are those fiscal year end 2020 numbers that you're referring to?
Yep, fiscal 2020, we had certified retained earnings as of 7/1/20 of almost 280,000. Since we
Okay.
didn't have a special town meeting, we never did anything or appropriated for retained earnings, and that's where we'd be coming from for this, is retained earnings for next year.
Okay,
And
and
this cycle happens again.
okay, and we're sitting here in April with, 2 months left in fiscal 2021. Do we have any understanding of where our retained earnings are going to land at the end of fiscal 2021?
I don't have an estimate. I could provide a very reasonable estimate. It's not going to be exact. I mean,
No, it's
They're
look,
essentially
the one thing we
following
should all
what
be able to
exists.
agree on is that the one thing we can all easily agree on is that it will be wrong by some number, right? So, but yeah, directionally, look, if you're going to add, another $100,000 or $200,000 in free cash flow that goes into retained earnings, probably has an impact on people's comfort margins, right?
Sure.
Because now instead of 128 left after this approved expenditure, you're looking at, 200 or 300 left.
And that's what I'd anticipate. So let me wrap up March's financials. Then I can give you a projection based on that of what I would think just based on the revenues. Again, the expenses, I'd have to look. So let me take a look based on the March financials, which I can get together probably Thursday. And then I could send you a projection for the next meeting.
That would be helpful.
Do you think that will help with the decision?
It would help me. I can't
Okay.
speak
Would
for
help
others.
me.
Perfect. All right, I'm on it. As soon as I get that done, I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
Okay, moving on, Town Hall Building Committee, 750,000 for continuation of architectural fees. What can you tell us all?
Well, if
Sam,
everyone's
before
a
we
yay,
begin,
then we can
is
just
there a
skip to the
document that
end
we
and-
can look at?
What, Michael?
Is there a document that we should be looking at for this $775,000 proposal?
Well, I'm going to leave that up to Phil Lear and his group.
Yeah, thanks
For,
for having us. So, we've got a little bit of a presentation. We do want to show you the most recent plan, just go through those quickly so that you know what you're paying for here. And then we'll hit some of the highlights as we go along. Mark Cameron is here with us. He's going to do the presentation, most of it. And then Carolyn Coffey is also here from the committee. So Mark, whenever you're ready.
I think I just need to be enabled on the sharing. Oh, I think someone did it. All right, here we go. And apologize, I'm traveling here. I'm not even on my own computer, so hopefully just bear with me if you can. But can everyone see that all right?
Yes.
Okay, so just a quick update of what we've been working on. So we've gone through the programming. We've gone through the ways we as a committee feel best to lay out the building, using the second floor of Old Town Hall for office spaces, and then a new addition annex to replace the existing annex. So this is today's updated plans, which we can just kind of walk through real quickly. What we've been working on here based on some social media feedback is the windows and the connecting portion of the building. It seemed to be the one thing from a design standpoint that the community was providing feedback on that felt they could use some improvements, if you will. So today's presentation went through, and again, just as you look at your screen here, focusing in and zeroing in on the set of windows between what's here as the old town hall and the new annex. And it's this set of windows in an egress door here. I don't in this presentation have what we previously had, but this presentation that we received from the architects this evening presented us in three different schemes with different sets of windows to go through, and the committee seemed to best receive this 3-window option here. So that's likely something that we would start socializing with the community. And just to further enhance what our recent, let me zoom in on this if I can here, just so you can see it a little bit better. So this is the basement level, and I recognize you might not be able to read all of these descriptions on your views, but this is the basement level, and what we previously did was we received feedback that we wanted to fully utilize or be able to utilize in the future the lower level. And we went through exercises of trying to get natural light down to the lower level, and it wasn't working in a sense there to complement the look from the exterior. Light wells were having to be added in, and it was adding costs, and it wasn't really an ideal solution anyway, but it was sort of one of those things where it was as good as we could get it, based on the elevations of the site, the existing town hall building, old town hall. So what we did was, in order to increase the usability, if you will, of the lower level, whether it be now or in the future, is to accommodate that occupancy load from a code standpoint. We had to add a full second means of egress stair down to the second floor. So beyond the height, beyond the light, beyond the layout, there's a code compliance standpoint of having to add the stair, which is the stair here in the connector. This did not always go to the basement. It went to levels 1 and 2. And the stair here, more towards the right of the screen where my cursor is, was the stair that went all the way up and down. So from a code standpoint, we had to add a stair. So we accomplished that in our most recent design. We are utilizing some storage over in Old Town Hall, because Old Town Hall doesn't have a height that will accommodate any kind of use without digging down, and we felt that was going to be an extreme cost exposure to dig down in Old Town Hall and get into underpinning of the existing foundation. So in the new annex side, we have some mechanical spaces, some custodial spaces. Safe Harbor is down in the lower level, tel data, file storage, the lower part of the vault, and this flex space that if we need to use it for training, town staff training, whether it be fire department, police department, town hall staff, we've always got that as an option. And if we need to repurpose that in the years to come, it's square footage there that we have the option to use. Again, we looked at putting offices and meeting rooms down there, and really pulled back on it as a group here because of the issue of being able to get natural light down there. It was really essentially going to be a bunker without a lot of natural light. The second floor, and again, I don't know if everyone has seen these in the past. Looks like, I don't know, I can't seem to zoom in any further here, but again, I recognize you probably can't read each title spot, but this is the first floor level as a whole. And the main entrance would be here on what we now know as the side. And you would enter through a vestibule, a lobby, where you've got three different work counters, service counters for the public. And these are most of the transactions that the public would be coming into to use the town hall from a customer service base, and more of the back of house operations, if you will, would be located on the second floor, both in Old Town Hall and the new annex. In the Old Town Hall, we've got the auditorium space, and we've got some newly added toilet rooms down in the front side. The old ticket booth would remain. There'd be a new code compliant stair that would be going up to the second floor. Right now, there's a code deficiency there where the size of that existing stairwell does not meet the current code requirement. But there is a series of 4 bathrooms there that would be allowed to be open and usable to the public during even off hours of the town hall operations. So basically things like the farmer's market, the strawberry festival, the concerts on the town common, ice skating, if you will, in the winter, and anything of that relative function, these would be able to be open to the public with the rest of the town hall remaining locked and access in through these sets of doors. Just moving up to the second floor, we've got a couple of meeting rooms, and we've got all of offices occupying Old Town Hall. TV 143 is over there, and also utilizing what we call, I guess, the projection loft there. That's not usable to many town functions because it's not accessible. It's based on the different levels that we have with the existing building. It was a very hard space to try and make accessible. So it was left as an option for 143 because it also gives, it's a weird intermediate level that gives a view down into the auditorium space. And then in the new annex, we've got some meeting rooms, the engineering department, the town manager, and this main meeting room, which we're calling meeting room number 3, would be the basically the Board of Select meeting room. That would be where most of those meetings the intent is of where they would be held. And then again, in the old town hall, we'd be bringing up everything up to code. Everything would be code compliant. Based on the volume of work that we're doing, we're going to be required to bring up the building into full code, which even includes a chairlift onto the stage, which we're working out the details of how to aesthetically make that blend in, but fire protection and everything that the new code requires, along with energy in the new building. You know, the old town hall would not be getting a full gut, if you will. The intent, based on a restoration, is to preserve as much as we can. So it wouldn't be getting a full siding replacement and things of that nature, if you will. It's more about preserving what we have, leaving what's usable and intact, but replacing what is failed. Rotted wood, failed windows, repairing plaster, not full gut, but it would be getting new mechanical, electrical, fire protection systems in that building. And so we're just looking to socialize these things with the community. Here's a general exterior site plan layout. The total number of parking spaces doesn't change. The layout changes a little bit. The handicap spots would be along the back here of the building, closest to the corner by the church, with a ramp coming up to achieve the elevations that we need to make the first floor completely uniform. Again, here's another look at it, and this out front here would be an emergency egress out of that stair that sits between the two buildings, the new and the old. And if we flip to some of the exterior renderings here, if I can. For some reason it's not coming up. Did come up before. Oh, I apologize, I can't get it to come up right now, but the intent was that the railings and everything along the new to the old town hall, we'd have handicap accessible entrances, and we wouldn't have to have any clunky railings that would take away from the charm and the look that we currently have. So that's what we've been working on, and we've been trying to strategically push this information out to the community via social media. So again, some of the feedback that we were getting, it's been generally positive feedback. There's been obviously some questions that have been hit. So we worked as a committee today to kind of formulate a list of questions, and we'll be publishing a response through social media as to those questions. And then other than that, it was the design of those windows came into play. So we've been really trying to involve the community as best we can. We hope that through Facebook is really the avenue where we seem to get most interest is. If anybody can share that information, we promote and encourage everybody to share that information, because we are looking for honest feedback. We're all one community here, and we're trying to get that feedback together. We can stop sharing now because clearly that wasn't coming up, but just in terms of cost, which seems to be obviously now that that's all great, but what's it going to cost? And we look back to see what just to fix what we currently have and to bring up to date and up to code with no enhancements. And when I say enhancements, no added bathrooms in the old town hall, no added square footage, no more meeting rooms. It's really just fixing what we have. We were at $9.7 million, and that kind of assumed a construction start of next year. That would be just to fix what we have. And then what we put together was a full cost of what this project that we just showed the group here was in the range of 13.5 to 14.5 million. And I say a range because we're only at the first step of design. Out of the 3 major steps of design, we were in schematic design. So we have the layout, and then design development and construction documents will go through, and we'll establish all the details. We'll be selecting materials. We'll be figuring out all those details. There'll be some added work that wasn't planned yet, just in terms of finishes and how to connect the dots and things like that. And right now that range again is the 13.5 to 14.5 million. So from a cost standpoint, that's where we're at. So we look at the delta between the two, and it's really $3.5 to $4 million that's really the difference. I think it's fair to say that most people will acknowledge that the current town hall building is at the end of its usable life, and it needs some significant help. So this is gone back several years now, and we've done a lot to vet out questions over the years. And I think we're in a very good place right now. We have a very efficient design. We've gone through some engineering exercises in terms of taking out some square footage and what that would result to financially. We looked at taking, and even Brian Host was a part of that. I hate to put Brian on the spot, but Brian was there for a lot of those conversations where we took out square footage. We looked at taking a couple of occupants and assuming that we could find somewhere else within town hall to house them, and getting a little bit light down via light wells into the basement level. And the result came as a savings of $204,000. And that did not include fitting out new space for where those displaced occupants would need office space within town. So, in addition to that, architecturally from the exterior, it made the building non-symmetrical. So it took away from the aesthetic appeal from the exterior. Again, the square footage that we were able to delete or remove was not expensive square footage. We weren't deleting elevators and stairs. So it didn't, we weren't getting the bang for our buck there, if you will, by taking that out. So we put it back in and we left it where it was, but we felt that as a group, we went through the exercise. We analyzed it to realize, is there a savings here? Can we get this project down And we really fundamentally felt as a group that we couldn't, that this is really where it is at. And those costs, again, those 13.5 to 14.5 costs, they include, it's everything. I mean, it's the contingency, it's the direct cost, it's the design cost, it's the owner's project manager cost, it's the relocation of town hall staff for a year plus or minus. It's everything there. It's the furniture, fixture, and equipment that's going to have to go into the new building. It's everything. So then we got to look at, okay, how are we going to financially pay for that? We're working to get on the CPC's agenda to see if they're still willing to commit what we think was, based on the last round, around $4 million. We're hoping that they're still going to be of that mindset, or maybe even more, but we're hoping that we're still going to be in that $4 million range. So we'd be looking for the town to fund roughly 10 million there. So we've been working with Don and Chris to come up with plans of how that can be achieved. So right now we're working through that, and there's different philosophies there, if you will, and we welcome your input as well. But we truly feel that this is an efficient layout, and there's no wasted space. It's not loaded with a bunch of frills. It's a solid building that will be there for many years. And when the new systems that get installed, they'll reach their usable life at some point. And we've designed a building that's structurally can be retrofitted at that point without a lot of load-bearing partitions and columns and this, that, and the other. And it's fairly well open, so that the generations to come can hopefully take this building and do what they need to do with it. So, I mean, that's what I have. Phil, Carolyn, anything to?
Mark, thank you. That was a very thorough review. Does anybody on capital budget have any questions of Mark at this point in time on the progress that's been made? Remember, we're really looking at an authorization of $750,000 to continue the architectural and planning process through the next 2 steps of design, so we can get a firm price on the whole project. Ralph?
And just to add, just to include what that 750 is, that 750 is to continue with the design team and the owner's project manager to help this process go down the road. It also includes one test well. We've talked a lot about geothermal, and we as a group, we have a subcommittee assembled to investigate that and figure out if geothermal is the right move for us as a town. So we haven't committed to anything, but in that 750 there's a portion of that includes money to do one test well, so that we could include, because the engineers would essentially need that information to decide if it's feasible and if it can happen. That test well would then be able to be usable as one of the final wells if it was to go forward. So that is included in that, and that would be needed for the design team to finish their design. So sorry to interrupt, but just
Anything else?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Ralph?
Well, let me start by saying I certainly think this is a better design than the previous one. There's no doubt about it. I think your design team, that is the architects and also your project manager, also are doing a good job, as I understand it. I do question if we in fact approve $750,000. This presupposes there's another vote coming up that would approve this project at some future town meeting, perhaps a special town meeting. So we will make a commitment at some point for this whole thing within a half a year. What we see in the Capital Budget Committee, and others can speak to this as well as I can, is that however you finance this, and whether or not as the original charge from the selectmen is observed or not, it doesn't fit the 10-year capital plan so far as I can tell, although I'm delighted to be corrected about that. If in fact it is funded out of operating capital, which is kind of where that original selectman charge came from, then there will be precious little money for all the other things that have to be spent and inevitably will be spent in the town. So my question really is, assuming this presupposes a town meeting vote for $13.5 million or $14.5 million, how is the town going to feel about the fact that this inevitably results in having an override? Now, anyone can correct me. I'm delighted to be corrected on this. But I do think in all fairness, one should know before voting on $750,000 whether this presupposes and causes something which in fact is not being revealed at this time. So that's where I am. I have no problem with the design. I do think there are lots of things that could change. I would argue that using Facebook is a terrible way for many of us, certainly all the old goats. You'll be fine. Practically none of us are on Facebook, and certainly I don't intend to be on Facebook, okay? That would be nice to have a public meeting, okay? I know those are difficult, and everyone in this watching right now knows how difficult they were. But nevertheless, really, there is no forum for us right now, and many of us would like a forum, and we're not going to do Facebook, I can tell you that. Many of us won't. But anyway, it's a huge financial question, more than anything else, to be honest about it all and to cover future requirements for capital. I don't see how this happens. I'd be delighted to be informed, and hopefully there's something can come out of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you. And I guess I'll let Don or Chris speak to that on the budget side. On the informational side, you know, we've also talked about putting a comprehensive bit of information maybe through the Mariner, but you know, there's also been discussion of what demographic still receives the Mariner within town. Obviously, public meetings and public gatherings right now are sort of not allowed. So it makes it difficult. You know, it's certainly not that we're trying to withhold any information, but we're just trying to get it out there in the best ways that we can. So we've talked about the Mariner, and you know, we're certainly here to get feedback from all the different demographics here within town. But so if you see something, please let us know. But you know, it's really just we're trying to get this out to the community as much as possible. There is no withholding here of information, and we're gonna again today we put together and it's a work in progress right now of our committee putting some frequently asked questions together so that we can hopefully answer what we would think is a common question to the public. And the financial side of it is part of it. So we're working through that, and that's why some of these things take time. As you know, it's not just simple black and white answers, yes or no's, and there's some real serious thought that has to go into these before you make it public and put it in stone, if you will. So,
Thank you,
Mark. I'm going to move on through each member of capital budget before we start to try to answer some of these questions. I see you, Chris. I know you want to answer the financial one, but I'm not sure. I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask what they have.
At your disposal, whenever you want to call on me.
Brian, do you have any questions? You're muted.
Hopefully I'm off mute. I said all of my questions have absolutely been set forth in one form or another. And I would just thank the Town Hall Building Committee for listening attentively and being willing to take input and making an earnest effort to make this the best possible project that it can be. It's all we can ask of you. And I think to echo Ralph's comment, the design here speaks for the work that's gone into it. It is a massively different design than what we looked at 3 years ago, and it's something you should be proud of.
Mike, Dick, questions? Unmute yourself, remember.
Yes. I am still very concerned about this proposal having additional features that are nice to have, but not essential to deliver municipal services to the town. And I'm referring specifically to the TV studio and perhaps less so to some of the other non-municipal services for the running of the town. I feel like that point of view has really not been taken seriously, that the people who have specified what should be going into town hall have just gone ahead and decided that other groups do have a place there. But I feel that the project itself is too high in cost overall, and is in danger of not prevailing in a vote at town hall, on town hall. As far as socialization, I feel that your committee has not really presented your case thoroughly. Ralph's suggestion for a series of forums are possible and doable. I've attended many Zoom webinars with several hundred people on them, where people do have a chance to ask questions and present points of view. I think a forum is probably the most fair way to do it. Personally, I don't use social media for a variety of reasons. And I feel that people who don't use social media are being left out of the process, and you're missing a whole range of opinions by not presenting public forums, even if they're virtual. That's basically where I'm sitting right now. And thank you, though. I mean, this sounds disingenuous, but I do thank you and Carolyn and Phil and all the others on your committee for all the hard work that you have put in. But I do feel I need to point out those areas that I feel are gaps. So.
Thank you, Michael. Susan, do you have any questions?
I too would like to thank the committee for the work they've done. I would like one quick explanation. The number that you presented to us on March 9th was 9.5 million, including the markup, and today it's 13.5. And you said that includes everything. So all those other items that you talked about, design, contingency, relocation, which I believe was in there already, contingency. Just how do we get to 4 million more from the number on March 9th's presentation?
4 million for?
4 million more.
4
From
million.
9.5 to 13.
The direct work for this was always around 10 million, with the direct work being the actual construction costs, and then all of the soft costs coming in. So I think it never really escalated from 10. Maybe it was a miscommunication there, but it's always been in that realm of, you know, the direct costs being around just under 10 million or around 10 million, and then the indirects, the contingencies, the design, the OPM, the furniture, fixture and equipment, the relocation and temporary housing, all of that went up to the 13.5, 14.5 figure. So again, I'm not really sure. I mean, it must have been a miscommunication, but there was never a point where this was communicated as a $10 million project. And at some point, one of our slides, even that we presented to the Board of Select, was this is not a $10 million job.
So just clarification, that the number that is in the presentation from March 9th that's called markup, is that the contingency or is that something else?
I'd have to look at it. I'm not exactly sure which document.
It's the presentation that you gave us on March 9th. That's all right.
That it?
Yep.
Chris, you had your hand up.
That was me, Sam. Susan, that could have been, I don't know if I was on that meeting for the March 9th, but the $4 million delta could be what has been discussed of a potential CPC funding portion. So if the project was 14.5, that would be the 10 million on the town to borrow or come up with the cost for the 10 million.
Yeah, well,
I know
that's
there's
really-
only been that $4 million delta discussed of the CPC funding. And again, I apologize. I just want to throw that out there. I don't believe I was there for the March 9th, but
Yeah,
we've been
I
talking
mean,
about that
it
$4 million
does-
number for a little while.
Yeah, it does match up to that, but I don't think that's what it is, but.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I understand there's other things that weren't on that list. I'm just curious that it's 4 million more. Those other items didn't seem to be 4 million when there was already this markup number, which I assumed was contingency, but.
Phil, I know that you were about to converse with Russ Benetti on CPC, and at that point might have a better idea of what CPC would fund.
Yeah, I talked to Russ yesterday and he's going to get us on the schedule. You know, I told him at this time that it wasn't a commitment, but we were just looking for some direction. We didn't want to go through just assuming that we were going to get the 4 million like they've talked about in past years. So we just wanted to sit down with them and say, you know, is this still a reasonable direction for us? If it is, then we can continue with our projection here for the cost of the project and how we fund it.
Okay. Anybody on capital have any further questions?
I'd like to address one thing that Mike brought up on the 143 TV. You know, we didn't want to add them into the town hall floor plan either. Corey Evans brought it to my attention that they were supposed to be housed at town hall. And I said, that's great, but do you have a document that says that? And he did produce a document, an agreement between the town and the TV 143 TV. And it does state that the town will provide space in Town Hall at 43 Highland Ave. So with that in hand, we really didn't have a choice but to find a place for them in Town Hall. So.
Thanks, Phil. That helps.
Anybody want to make a motion on a recommendation on the 750,000? Oh, wait a minute.
Do you want me to answer Ralph's, how to try to give Ralph somewhat of an answer as much as I'm able? That's up to you, Sam. I know, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it would be great. I mean, I'm very concerned about what it's going to do to future capital projects, funding it all within the operating budget.
So you raise a very legitimate concern, Ralph, about how this would fit, right? And it's right kind of on the edge of a project that you can build into when I say the operating budget, I mean the whole spending plan, right? I mean the indirect costs, the shared expenses, everything that goes into the overall operating budget outside of the enterprise funds. And you can't really stick something of this size in one place. It's too big, right? It can't go in one place. And the select board position all along has been, hey, you know, let's try to fit it in there and not have any impact on raising taxes. See if we can fit it into the global expense plan. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And as I say that, they're going to require work and they're going to require a lot of conversation. One has already been raised, CPC, right? CPC did vote $4 million last time. And I believe that same number is both, again, while CPC hasn't voted on it because it hasn't been presented yet with the final proposal. The money's still there and the authorization levels are still there. I mean, this project meets criteria to get a funding level in that ballpark. There's also some very aggressive searching going on now for green communities and green energy money. And I think there's some real opportunities there. We've actually signed an agreement with National Grid just to explore options, because they're much more aggressively hunting for ways to reduce their demands rather than build new supply, right? And a new building presents a lot of those opportunities. We're also, the whole Green Communities program, which we're part of, is also opening up some funding for alternatives, like whether it's geothermal or other energy efficiency opportunities. There might be money that we didn't anticipate. There's also the ability to again, as the money's available, because this project would take a couple of years, and again, Don could jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to give, it would take several years before the full cost of this would have to be borne, right? Because it's like any project, right? You start it, and this wouldn't start at the most optimistic. This would be a spring of 22 project. And then if the bid document's are ready and it's all approved, it wouldn't be able to start until the spring of 22. And it's about 12 to 18 months, I think, right, Phil? Something like that, a window of construction. And so you'd be able to have a couple of years to continue to build and ramp up. So you'd have 2 or 3 years to plug in numbers. One possible way is to say, okay, if we have more than X amount of free cash in the town's financial policies, shoot for a 3 to 4% free cash number. Some of that can be allocated over a couple of years. Another way is to potentially repurpose pre-existing capital approvals. Like, that happens regularly, right? If we don't spend the whole amount of a project, the money gets returned. There's opportunities now that were not there weeks and months ago. The town is looking at somewhere north of $2 million of American Recovery Act money coming towards us. The first tranche, there's two $400,000 roughly tranches of money coming theoretically this fiscal year, next fiscal year. And there's another roughly 1.6 million that's being run through the county. The problem is we don't know how that's working yet. The county stayed away from the last round of money and hope they do this time. And that money can be spent not necessarily on town hall, but it could be spent on environmental systems, the heating and cooling and stuff like that. It could also potentially be spent, it's definitely targeted to schools as well. So there might be some school projects that have already been approved, or that might be coming up in the pipeline, that this money could go to that and offset some of those costs. And that's a fair amount is still to be determined, Ralph. But I know that there is this $2+ million number, and it's better to spend it on things you need, right? It's you don't want to just go on a buying spree, right? Oh, that looks cool, right? If we have committed projects, let's use that money, right? And we don't know yet. I mean, Don is watching this all the time. He talks to his colleagues in other communities, and we just don't know. And I've talked to my colleagues in other towns in Norfolk County to make sure the county commissioners stay out of this, because we don't want them to. The $137 million that's coming to Norfolk County communities, and Coas is one of the smaller players in that. Shouldn't, it's multiple times the county's budget. They have no reason to get involved in this. And then on top of that, we've heard all this discussion about this, the potential, and that's all it is right now, for infrastructure money coming out of the federal government. Water, sewer, by the way, we should definitely get in line for those kinds of projects, but also for schools and for other items like that. So that's still being drafted, so we really have no idea what that's going to say yet. At the same time, there's money that's flowing through the state that's helping their budgets, and I'm getting every indication they're going to find ways to help local communities with a variety of funding opportunities. There's also, again, we don't know if this is going to come to fruition or not. I hope it will. There's a Mass School Building Authority. I mean, I think everyone is familiar with that helps finance and fund school projects. There's also a libraries fund that's very similar. There's nothing for municipal buildings like public safety or town halls. There's actually legislation that's been signed on by a lot of representatives to create something like that at the state level. It wouldn't be quite as rich as the School Building Authority, but anything that would get us lower interest costs or any kind of money towards a project, that would be great. Now, again, that's not money in the bank today, but it's definitely something. So those are just some examples of things, some of which are very real, like being able to move some free cash or to maybe repurpose some money that's already been approved if those funds click in. And we do know we're getting more than $2 million coming our way over the next 6 to 12 months. That suddenly allows you can pay down ahead the project and not have to bond as much. And that's the goal, right? You want to get that, again, I'm sorry, I was jumping in and out. I've been dealing with some emails from the CPC tonight. So as I was watching this meeting, the net cost between repair and this plan is what, Carolyn, 4 million? I think that's what we're talking about, Mark, right? Something like that. I don't know if you talked about that. I'm sorry. I was called back and forth even though I didn't go off my office. So the net funding that the town is really being asked to look at, I think, is something like $4 million between a full repair of both buildings, or the annex and the historic building, and a new and fully renovated and expanded and repurposed historic structure and annex. So there's definitely so as you bring some of those costs down, and then you start to say, well, what if we have a really good free cash year, right? And again, it's, we can all look around. people seem to be finding land that was never built on, and they're putting up $5 million homes. We have a few of those, and we have, the project on 3A, and it's a couple of things that are percolating. And let's say we budget about 450, I think, Don, right? We expect that. What if we had a year that we got to 6? Well, instead of running that other 150 through into the operating budgets, that could go to a project like this without having any impact on anybody. It's free found money, and then that rolls into the tax base for the future. You've now taken 150,000 of annual debt service right off the top. And there's other ways we can do things like that. There could be additional money that comes in out of the meals tax, or auto excise tax, or any other fee or service that wasn't either anticipated or wasn't budgeted for. That's recurring. You can't do it for things that aren't recurring. So a combination of kind of buying down, or paying down the cost, so you don't have to bond, and then finding ways to fit it in with additional revenue that comes in, and at the same time, looking at how to bond this. Obviously, the shorter time you bond, the less interest you pay. The longer time, the lower the annual costs are. So you can go. You kind of balance those, and of course, the lower interest rate, the better off you are too. So you look at what's available, and if we've run some numbers between 20 and 30 years. And again, I'm happy to share. There was a very draft presentation, Ralph, that we did the other day. I think we shared it to advisory. It's just an example, right?
I have it.
So happy to share that. It's not official. It's not the plan. It's just an example, right? And that had it knocked down to, I think it had the borrowing cost knocked down to about $7 million, Don, right? Something like that. With pathways that were reasonable, and then the net operating costs were able to be factored in with a combination of new growth and maybe a small piece of capital, not 700,000, maybe 75,000 or something like that, right? So and so you add this together, you can actually make it work. Now, it's not easy, and it's going to require all of you, and I mean all of you, the leadership team of the town, all the boards and committees, to collectively say, yeah, we want to do this, we want to make this work. The challenge or the charge has been make it work. Find ways, Don, find ways, Chris, try to be creative, and then if this is the project, right? If this is the project, and this becomes a priority to make it work, pick every tree. And again, 6 months ago there wasn't an ARA tree out there with $2.3 million on it. Well, it exists, and we're going to get that money whether we want it or not. The money's coming to us, and so let's use it productively. And it's coming once, so let's spend it on capital items for one-time expenses. We don't want to budget that and pay staff. That would be crazy, even if it allows you to do that. So those are just some examples, Ralph. There's not a path, but I think there's buckets. I think the how long you finance and how much you finance is critical. How much can you pay down that amount, and even with the cost, right? I mean, are there ways to continue to squeeze? I don't know. I mean, we see both ways. There's some real pressures on supply chains that are changing costs. There's also there may be inflationary pressures. We'll have to see how that all plays out in terms of what happens with bidding, and what kind of finishes. The committee still has a lot of work to do, and so do the owner's project manager and the engineers and architects to really to make the building functional and value, right? So it's going to last a long time, but it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't. It can be utilitarian in a nice way. I mean, it's on a common. You want it to look nice from the outside. The offices don't have to be particularly fancy. They just have to work. They just have to be, flexible in design. So does that help a little bit, Ralph?
You know, yeah, of course. Well, thanks, Chris. I understand a lot of that. I think that the critical thing that, you know, and I can't speak for the town, but I have a fairly good sense of the town. And that is that if you go in and say, okay, we're going to put in $750,000 and we are going to probably vote on whatever it is comes out of that $750,000 investment, right? You need to be quite sure that you are fulfilling people's expectation that their taxes are not going to increase either because of this project and or because we can't fund some project, whether it's the schools, the, you know, I don't know, you name the one that would come out, the DPW, I don't know, you name the one, right? So the thing is, there's a sense that there is a commitment not to have this thing cause additional taxation. That's really what it's all about. In order to get there, I understand all of the ways that we might be successful, but I do think before you actually can sell the public on this, you have to lay it out in somewhat more quantitative terms, even if they're somewhat speculative. I do think you have to do that. If you don't do that, then people will doubt that, in fact, this thing will, in fact, fit within the 10-year capital plan, because it doesn't right now. All of us know it does not, without some really significant, I don't know, head scratching about what do you do and what don't you do. So, you know, I'm not objecting to it. I'm just saying the commitment is something we should find out. How do we fulfill that commitment in a really quantitative way, if at all possible, in order to make that $750,000 not just be another down payment on something we don't do. That's all.
No, I got you, Ralph, and that's the commitment that we've been given by, that's the mandate, I should say, we've been given is to be creative. I know Brian and Sam have sat in some of these meetings already, and so I think there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I am that are looking at this, and I think that if there's, and again, there's also funding that's making itself available. If the leadership of the town says make this a priority, Don and I are obviously making it a priority to find every dollar we can, find every financing opportunity we can, because you're absolutely correct. This can't be plugged in and knock out a whole bunch of stuff. You can't do a project of this size and just stick it in one slot. It'd be nice if we could. We wouldn't have any of these debates, would all be taken care of, but we can't. It's just not there. So it does put a premium on creative but very value-driven and conservative financing, because this has to be real. You got to pay debt. Okay, the bondholders expect their debt to be paid on time, every time. There's no alternatives, right? You know, you might be able to defer trimming the tree, you might be able to defer the paint job, but you can't defer the bond payments. So it absolutely has to be paid.
Thanks.
So Ralph, it's Brian. I'm just going to chime in here for a second. I don't know. I've probably spent a solid 40-hour week, over the course of the past month, working with Don, going through the numbers. There have been several summit meetings with, Sam and I and Chris and Don and, others, including some folks from the select board as well as the advisory board. And, look, to make a long story short, you can buy down the debt service on this by, funding a chunk of it with CPC. You can take another chunk out, if we, redirect some COVID money, right? Either directly into this project or by, effectively recapitalizing projects in other divisions that we've already committed to that we can now fund with the COVID money and recycle that capital into this, to buy down the debt service right up front. And we might even have a couple of years of free cash flow that we can stockpile, prior to, actually incurring the full debt principal amount on this project by the time it's done, right? Which will also reduce the total principal amount. But in the end, there's going to be a substantial principal number here, and a substantial debt service nut. And Chris touched on this, but where the rubber really meets the road is that all the departments across town, have to buy into the commitment that we constrain the growth in our operating budgets to a lower rate than the growth in our revenues. It's that simple. If we do that, then we will continue to have free cash flow at the end of each year that can be reallocated back to capital or directly and then into this project or directly into this project, one or the other. And this will be viewed as a financial success. If we don't exercise that discipline on our operating budgets, and they continue to grow, at or in excess of our revenue growth rate, obviously there is no room for this debt service in the $2 million annual capital allocation. And yeah, we will absolutely spiral into an override discussion, and people can blame it on the capital budget committee. People can blame it on this project. But at the end of the day, it's just simply that the operating budget was not constrained necessarily when it needed to be. So, that's the litmus test 5 years down the road. It's kind of as simple as that. People need to commit to it and live by it and not let it drift year to year. If this is to be a financial success. And I agree with you wholeheartely. I think we need, a much more ironclad view on how we're going to make that happen. By the time that we're asking for votes on the actual construction funding, but we should be committed to that concept now, even as we vote on the first 750. I'd love to have the whole financial plan in front of us today, but we're not there yet. I do think we need to have a better handle on it when we vote for the construction dollars, whether that be in the fall or in the spring. The other thing I just want to mention is, the financial plan was obviously one of the sticking points, or one of the reasons the capital budget, unanimously objected to the last project. And there is progress being made there, and there's more to come, and hopefully we are in the right place prior to the construction dollars vote. But the other three, I think it's important to revisit the scorecard on these. The other three were that, number one, we did not have, I think, a clear picture of what the renovation alternative cost would be. The second was that I don't think we had a clear picture of what the actual project cost was going to be the last time around. We had this $12.5 million number, but that was for a building without air conditioners, generators, and heaven knows what else was pulled out, to make that target number. And the other issue was we were very unhappy with the design. I think your words were that the hallways were a rabbit warren of hallways to nowhere and turn, and dogleg turns for no apparent purpose. So I do think it's important to look at all four of those items that that caused us up to object last time. I think on three of them, the boxes have been checked. This team has done a lot of work to actually put a real number on the renovation alternative, and not only quantify it, but give us a perspective of what you would or wouldn't get versus this project. The cost number that's being quoted to you today, I do feel is all in. It's a range, obviously, but people aren't sort of pulling things out randomly just to hit an arbitrary cost number. This is the real range. And I think the design, the more you look at it, the more impressive it is. It's just a very efficient and symmetrical and functional design by someone who clearly designs new buildings, as opposed to redesigning the interiors of 200-year-old structures, which is kind of what we were working with the last time around. So I feel like, of those four items that we really objected to last time, three of those boxes are checked, and one of them is a work in progress, and hopefully we can check that box before we have to vote construction dollars. The last point I'll make is that, even with all the problems around the last deal, we did support funding the next step, which was the construction docs and the bid docs. And that's what's being asked of us today. So I just ask everybody to keep that in mind. I don't feel like we should be moving the goalpost necessarily, and I do feel like we're in a much better place today than we were 3 years ago, with effectively the same ask in front of us.
Anybody have anything else? Do we want to move on a recommendation for the 750?
Let me ask a question.
Sure.
Sam, can we get a recommitment to that original selectman or select board vote? And in fact, this will be consistent with the 10-year capital plan at least to get something of that nature, and Chris, I would hope you would endorse it as well, and maybe Dawn, then in fact, what would sway me was that in fact you have made this commitment and you are going to fulfill it, and you're committing to it one more time. In the absence of that, it says I don't know what to believe, and I worry that in fact it may or may not be reasonable to think that you can actually make that commitment. But if you do make it, you'll do exactly what Brian said, is that you'll find ways to actually find the money. So I'd love to see the commitment made. I don't know whether you can ask for it, Chris, or not, or whether you'd be willing to give it yourself. But to me, that means a lot, because you just recommit what in fact was the original charge. And I would appreciate that. And I'd love to see that before I had to vote yes on this. And once I saw that, and you guys are committing to it, and you're understanding what the implications are going forward on the capital budget, and the fact we need the $2 million clean instead of having it deducted, down to zero, basically because of debt service, which is what is going to happen, that we actually have money to actually roof the buildings, to do the new school technology stuff, which is going to come in at high numbers, and all the other things that are going to happen here, and whether or not you want to do something on Crocker Lane, or you're going to do something about lighting a field. I mean, you've got a slew of things coming up. We got to be sure we're saying, yeah, we're going to make those things happen in spite of the fact it's difficult. That's what I'm asking for. That's all.
Well, I mean, I'm not a voting member of the select board, you know that, Ralph, but I will tell you this, I would not recommend putting this into a whole hog into the capital plan, because you can't. Okay, you can't do it. This committee and its predecessors and its successors, I hope and expect, working collaboratively with all kinds of other boards and committees and staff, have done a really thorough job, I think, of managing the town's capital assets and staying on top of stuff. I mean, we've invested a lot of resources into the facilities department. So we maintain our buildings better, and we stay on top of this. You folks have funded software, which is aggressively being used to stay on top of building systems in a way we never could before, do electronic work orders. I do, at some point when we're through this process, I'd love to have Nick and Nadeem, the director, Mark Kelly retired a couple of weeks ago, so who did great work, by the way. But Mark and Nadeem and Nick, the director, a really great team. I mean, they have all kinds of certifications. They're gung-ho. They get stuff done. They're very low key about doing it, but I think you want to hear them, because I think that is as much of that commitment was critical to make before we even do this, because who's going to pay, who's going to spending money on a building you're not going to maintain? It's like buying a new car and not committing to making the oil changes, right? Unless you're buying a Tesla, you don't need to make oil changes on those. So I would not. Yeah.
We violently agree. Okay.
Yes, no, absolutely. I agree with you, Ralph. You can't, it doesn't mean you can't take a small piece, perhaps, right? A small amount annually, but not a big one, because you can't. And I'm not going to speak for Don, but I think we're on the same page on it.
What you have to realize, though, is the debt flows into and is taken out of the $2 million you make available to us. I mean, that's where
right. So it has to be funded in an alternative way. I agree with you, Ralph. Maybe a small portion, like I said, I just used 75,000 as an example. Maybe that, but you can't put 750. You can't. It can't be done. You'd wipe out the capital plan, and
correct.
Too many other things that you'd have to do. That's why we have a lot of work to do. Though, as Brian said, there's work. It's a work in progress. There's ways you got to get the bonded debt down by finding alternative sources, and then you got to find ways to find revenue that's not going to impact the capital program, because it's too.
Can you ask the selectmen at the next meeting to recommit to what we had agreed to originally in 2019?
Yeah, I'm going to meet with they do an agenda plan. They're going to be hearing this next on the 27th, and I'll talk to Diane and Kerry, the chair and vice chair, about this. And I think I think everyone's on the same page, honestly, Ralph. That said, let me see. I can't commit to what they're going to do or not do. That said, I'm having this conversation because I'm comfortable the board is telling me that this is the way they want to go.
Well, I'm going to ask capital budget if you would rather defer a vote on this until we hear back from Chris on what the select is saying.
I will say, Sam, that the select board is waiting for your, they're holding, advisories voted, they really want to hear, and by the way, if you want to caveat your vote saying, we really want you to reaffirm whatever, that's up to you. But I think that would be more effective at this point, because Tom is at, the 27th is the end. Okay, I can't get
I know that.
anything else. but
Always
physical
make a
warrant.
recommendation from town floor, from the. floor.
Yeah.
No, I don't like to do it, but we can.
Yeah.
We may have to do it with sport.
I would not encourage you to do that, but look, I'm happy to carry back what Ralph asked to the board, and I don't think there's any harm at all in saying, look, we're committing to keeping this in the tax, in the operating structure, okay, and not plug it all into capital and wipe it out. I mean, I think it's that's just the charge. So I'm happy to communicate that back, and in fact, I think it wouldn't be surprised me if there's at least some selectmen watching us right now. In fact, there are. So they already heard you, Ralph. So
Well, that's good.
so
Hey, Ralph, would you be comfortable and/or interested in voting it on a contingent basis or subject to?
Yeah, I'd do it on a contingent basis, I'd say, that because, I don't want to object to it. I just simply want to make sure that what people actually were led to believe in this town is in fact what we're going to do. Otherwise, it's really a break of faith at this stage, and you just no more breaks of faith, okay, on this thing, and that's my view. So I can do it on a contingent basis. I would also say that please give us an opportunity in a webinar or something else to add our input. We're not doing social media, so at least we have some input, so you might actually get some additional thoughts from some of us who care a lot about this. We really do, and not trying to be difficult, but just to say, come on, there's some things you might think about again. But anyway, those two things are important, but the key one is financially we can afford this, and in fact it's not going to cause whether you call it excluded debt or death or either way, pardon the pun if it was unintentional, but anyway, whether it's excluded debt and or override, I don't think that really is in the cards at this point. People will say you can't do the same thing to me twice, so I do think you got to think this through very carefully. Anyway, so contingent basis, okay with me. Okay.
Well, does somebody want to design a motion that says all of this?
Ralph, do you have any particular words in mind?
Well, the obvious thing is you say the capital budget committee approves the expenditure of $750,000 for architect's fees contingent upon a recommitment by the Board of Selectmen to their original words, and I will read them to you so you can listen to them. The budget for Town Hall be reasonable, prudent, and consistent with a 10-year capital plan, and be governed by the town's ability to fund such construction with a net neutral tax impact on the residents of the town. That's the exact language. So if you want to put that in there as the contingency, and people want to, and the selectmen want to vote, or select board want to vote for that, I think I'd be okay. If they don't want to vote for that, then in fact we're not in line at all anymore. So.
Do I have a second to that, or?
I'll second that.
Okay, well, let's all vote. I'll have a roll call vote. Ralph?
Actually, hold on, just before we vote. I mean, Ralph said architect's fees. I would just ask Phil and Mark what the correct description of this would be. It's more than architect's fees.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be design and owner's project manager's fees. So it's
Okay, and is it also the bid docs and the bid process?
yeah, Brian, the warrant article says for the creation of detailed engineering, design, and construction plans, and the conducting of a bidding process. So it's the whole thing, right? To get to bid.
Okay.
It's to get that, yes, it's to get us to that bid number, where that real hard number. Right now we have a range based on many factors, but.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the right words in the motion. So it's what Chris just read effectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
Susan,
All right, I'll second that.
understand that? Did you get that for the motion?
Oh, I started to, and I put a note to look at the warrant description. Is that where you got that, Chris?
Okay.
And Ralph, would you mind sending me the, what you read from the
Yes,
selectmen's
I will.
meeting?
Yes, I will, Susan. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll second.
Okay. We'll go for a roll call vote. Ralph?
Aye.
Sam? Aye. Susan?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
And Mike Dick, just in case?
Aye.
All right, we got through that. That's scary.
Well, it is contingent, and I hope that we get the language correct in our motions.
Yes. Now, when should we go to the selectmen?
They're gonna discuss this on the 27th, a week from tonight.
The 27th, okay.
Mark, would you?
Put
see
that
what
on my
you-
calendar.
webinar?
Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, could you consider what you can do to get us more involved and some of the thoughts so that before you get too far down this design, we've all got some input on it?
Yes, and I think the intent there is that's before annual town meeting or after town meeting.
No, I think you ought to do it between now and the time you actually, between now and in this annual town meeting. Yeah, doing this, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
And we welcome that constructive criticism, because again, we've had these conversations, and some of the simple topic is who in the town still gets the Mariner. I mean, that was, we're trying to figure that out as a group here, and so we welcome that recommendation, and we will take that
Okay, thank you.
to the committee. Thank you.
Anybody have anything else on town hall? Okay, I'm going to ask if you've had a chance to review the minutes that Susan has sent out, particularly the,
Thanks, Mark. Thanks,
Sit with
Phil.
us. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
the 8th of March, the 22nd of March, and the 29th of March. Have you had a chance to review them?
I have, the minutes are very sparse. I'm not sure if there was anything else that people feel ought to be added to them. But it was just a general description of the discussion we had. But I don't know if there's anything else that ought to be added to any of them.
Ralph, did you have any questions
No,
on them?
I was okay with them all. Yeah.
I was
Brian?
as well, Sam. I read all three and I was fine with all of them.
Okay, Susan, can I assume that you're okay with them?
I'm fine with them.
Excuse me. We need a vote to approve them. If somebody wants to make a motion. Nobody wants to approve them, huh?
I just need to pull up the dates. I'm happy to make the motion. My computer died.
Uh-oh.
What were the dates? What were the dates of the three sets of minutes? Do we have to do them
The
separately,
dates
or can
were
we do them in one
March
shot?
8th.
Sorry?
The dates are March 8th, March 22nd, and March 29th.
Can we do them in one shot, or we have to do them separately?
I think we can do them in one shot, can't we?
Unless
Be
people have
quicker.
comments. I'd like to move that we approve the minutes from March 8th, March 22nd, and March 29th.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, Ralph?
Aye.
Sam? Aye. Brian?
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Thank you all. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn if anybody wants to go to bed. I don't know,
moved.
maybe you all want to stay up all night.
I'll second that.
Ralph, I thought I saw you nodding off when Chris was talking.
So- No comment.
All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
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 Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Next
I
meeting
don't
is
know
when?
when our next meeting will be, but I will